Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Trump administration's second term has triggered an exodus from the Justice Department. Over 100 senior career officials have departed in just 8 months. Civil rights, immigration, and environmental enforcement units are among the most affected, raising alarms about institutional memory and legal capacity. Here with more details and analysis is Bloomberg Law reporter Suzanne Monyak. She spoke with Terry Gerton.
We found that more than a third of career managers at the Justice Department have left this year since the start of the second Trump administration. This is pretty unusual because leaders who are hired through the career process tend to stay through political administrations. They're not political appointees. They stay sometimes for decades, even with the government.
So what kind of roles are we talking about here? Are they lawyers, managers, all of the above?
A mix of both. We used a federal directory posted by the Office of Personnel Management under government transparency law that included more than 300 career leaders at the Justice Department. They include some members of the Senior Executive Service and other management positions. Some of them are lawyers, some of them are not.
Are there particular sectors in the Department of Justice that were more impacted by these departures than others?
Yes, even though it was about a third overall, at least. We saw more than 3/4 of, for example, the Civil Rights Division of those managers had left during the second administration. This, I think, is a reflection of how hard of a pivot that division has taken under this administration to align with the second Trump administration's ideological priorities.
And what about immigration and environmental divisions? They seem to be pretty significantly impacted as well.
Yes, we really saw a lot of the attrition in divisions that affected policy areas that the administration has really targeted. So the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is the component that houses the immigration courts, and the Environmental Division, which enforces environmental laws across the country, lost about half of its career leaders, at least.
We certainly hear a lot of talk in the press and in the political cycles about the Department of Justice. But what exactly do these folks do on a day-to-day basis? Are they defending the government? Are they prosecuting? What is their day-to-day role?
It really varies. We looked at more than 300 roles across the department. So yes, there are attorneys who are in management roles, maybe overseeing litigators. We're also seeing people leaving within the human resources section of the Justice Department. So it really just runs the gamut in the types of roles that they are. But what they have in common is that they were all appointed through the career process. And that's a merits-based process. And a lot of those people have many years, if not decades, of experience each.
Right. And you mentioned that usually these folks stay regardless of the party that's in control of the presidency. So what makes this cycle of departure so unusual?
Oh, well, that's exactly it. A lot of people, when they join the federal government, that's a career for life for them. And some of the people that I spoke to for this story, they never saw themselves leaving at this time or retiring early. They saw this as where they were going to spend the rest of their careers. And then when this administration took over, deferred resignation offers came out, and some of the divisions just had to take a very different stance than they had taken in the past. And they were being asked to do work they hadn't been asked to do in the past that really just represented a departure from the work that had been done previously. And there's just been an environment under this administration to really push out federal workers. And I think that's something that administration officials have been pretty open about, that they want to get deep state actors out of government, as they describe them, and they want to do a fresh start or a redirect. And so we really did see that across the Justice Department and across the government more broadly, as people took those offers, were pushed out and left.
Were the majority of these DOJ departures as a result of the DRP?
It's hard to say exactly why everyone left. Some people, will disclose why they left in posts. Some people do not. Quite a few were from the deferred resignation offer. Absolutely, 2 of those went out this year, which allowed federal government employees to remain on paid leave through the end of the fiscal year, which ended at the end of September. But we also saw people who were, fired. We saw people who left voluntarily, technically, but after being forcibly reassigned or demoted. Some people, career managers with many years of experience, were put in a task force called the Sanctuary Cities Working Group, which ended up being known as a task force that, didn't do meaningful work, at least in the view of a lot of the people there, and now has no one working there. None of the people reassigned there are still with the department.
I'm speaking with Suzanne Monyak. She's a reporter at Bloomberg Law. So Suzanne, with this significant departure, a third of the Department of Justice leaders, but concentrated in some particular divisions, what happens to DOJ's functionality and effectiveness? Like, this seems to represent a significant loss of institutional memory. How will that impact how DOJ does its work?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think that's one that a lot of former officials, a concern that they raised in interviews for this story. It's absolutely a significant loss of expertise and institutional memory. One role that career people will really have throughout the government is that when political administrations change, you'll see new political appointees come in, and maybe they have experience, doing this work at the career level, maybe they don't. And having a career staff already in place, knowing how things work, knowing what to do, I'm told can really sort of ease that transition as the politicals come in and out, as administrations change. Certainly, I think with this amount of loss, they're going to be doing hiring. But until those new people are in place, I cannot help but imagine that there will be some compromise of functionality to the Justice Department.
Well, you mentioned the expectation that they would be hiring, and yet the federal government remains under a hiring freeze across the board. Has DOJ received any exceptions for that to begin hiring to replace these folks?
There have been exceptions made. We've seen hiring, for example, at the Civil Rights Division, the one that lost more than 76% of its career managers. It also lost a number of its lower level attorneys as well. And we have already seen hiring in that division. The political leader heading it has been posting on social media, we're hiring. So we are seeing some enthusiasm from administration officials to kind of bring those people on. So yes, there have been exceptions made.
We've been talking here about the divisions that were most significantly impacted by departures, but were there others that weren't, so that their workload kind of continued on?
Yes, we saw lower levels of departures in the criminal division, for example. I think that one was slightly less affected. At the civil division, whose attorneys handle a lot of the litigation against the Trump administration's federal policies, they lost at least about a quarter of their career managers. So while we did see pretty high shares across the board, there were certainly some that were below that 1/3 we saw overall.
And DOJ also has a pretty large responsibility for enforcing tax laws, right? They have a tax division. How were they affected?
Yes, the tax division lost at least a third of its career managers, so right around that across the board point. The National Security Division lost about half. And I should also mention that these are really all minimum numbers. These were departures that we were able to confirm and be sure of, but it's likely an undercount because there are people who will still be on the website even though they've left, and people are leaving every day. So in between when I report the story and it publishes, we might even have had a few more departures.
And so as you talk to folks either in or recently in the Department of Justice, what's their takeaway? What does this mean for the effectiveness of the department and its future?
I mean, I think there's definitely a lot of concerns, both about its ability to do its work and about morale across the department. One of the appeals of working in the government is having a stable job that you can spend years and years doing. And that ideal, I think, has really been eroded under this administration, and that's not specific to the Justice Department. We're seeing that everywhere. And I also think there's been a lot of concerns about politicization at the Justice Department, as we're seeing a lot of career people leaving, people who've worked through multiple political administrations from both parties who, their goal is just to do their job and enforce or argue the laws as they see them, or as they're supposed to. We see with more political people coming in, career people coming out, I think that just kind of fuels those concerns that this department might be more politicized under this administration than it has in the past.
And the technicalities of the cases that the Department of Justice handles are pretty significant. So it's not like you can just walk in from a private sector commercial firm and understand the roles of the Department of Justice, right?
Absolutely. A lot of people at DOJ have talked about how, what they do. It is a niche expertise. It is something that you have to learn how to do. That, like it's just as you said, working at a big firm would not necessarily, you wouldn't come in knowing exactly what to do, hitting the ground running always. And so there is something to be said for having had that experience in the government, for having argued in court for the government for years and know what you're doing before you, say, become a manager. So, and, you see that really from the top down. When people lose their managers, it affects morale at the lower levels as well.
And do you think in the long run, is this likely to affect the success of the DOJ in the cases that it does bring before the courts?
It's certainly hard to say. I'm sure the administration would say that it wouldn't, that they're going to bring in new people. But I think when speaking to former officials, many don't see another option of that than that. When you've lost people who know what they're doing, who've successfully argued cases, it's hard to imagine that there wouldn't be some kind of negative effect on their ability to successfully push through cases. And we've even seen that some in courtrooms. We've seen prosecutors be rebuked by federal judges for their conduct in courtrooms. And while, it's hard to draw that direct through line to say, oh, well, it's because of the attrition, I think it's a very possible, if not likely, result of people with career expertise deciding to leave.
Suzanne Monyak is a judiciary reporter at Bloomberg Law. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive and subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.